"This is my first time," the virgin bride whispered, her hands trembling with both fear and hope, until the rancher smiled softly and said, "Then I'll make it gentle. But can tenderness alone ease the ache of two hearts, learning love for the first time?" The sun hung low over the Texas plain, turning the dust into gold. A wagon rattled up the narrow road toward a lonely ranch, its wheels creaking beneath the weight of something more than luggage: expectation, fear, and the promise of a new life. Inside sat Irene Vale, her gloved hands folded so tightly in her lap the knuckles were white. She had never traveled this far west, never left the quiet convent town where she'd lived since her parents' passing. Her heart beat hard enough to make her breath tremble. Today she was a bride, married by proxy to a man she had never met. The driver tipped his hat toward the ranch ahead. "That'll be the Boone place," he said. "You're sure about this, miss?" Irene nodded, though her throat ached. "Yes, sir." The ranch spread before her, like a promise: broad pastures, weathered fences, the cry of hawks slicing through the wind. And standing by the corral, tall and still as a pine, was Cassian Boone, her husband. He didn't wave, didn't smile, just watched as the wagon drew near. His hair was the color of late harvest wheat, his jaw dark with the day's work. There was strength in him, but not the kind that frightened, more like a steadiness, something built to last. When Irene stepped down, her boots touched the dirt and she nearly stumbled. Cassian caught her before she could fall. His hand was rough and warm, the kind of touch that could mend or break depending on how it was used. "You're smaller than I thought," he murmured, voice like gravel smoothed by years of silence. Irene blinked, unsure if it was a compliment. "And you're taller," she said softly. That made him smile barely, a crack in stone. He led her inside the house, its rooms quiet but clean. There were signs of care, fresh flowers on the table, a folded quilt on the chair. It wasn't grand, but it felt waiting. "I cleared out the front room for you," Cassian said. "You can take your time settling in. We'll do things at your pace." Her pace. The words sounded like kindness, and kindness was something she hadn't dared hope for. Dinner passed with awkward silence. Irene tried to thank him for the meal, but her voice broke halfway. Cassian only nodded, patient. There was a gentleness in his restraint, as though he knew any sudden movement might frighten her off. When the lanterns dimmed, Irene stood by the window, watching the stars scatter across the endless dark. Somewhere, a coyote howled. She pressed a hand to her chest and whispered to herself, "You can do this. You can begin again." Outside, Cassian lingered by the porch, staring at the same sky. He could feel her fear from where he stood, but also something else, something new and fragile: trust. If you think you've seen a quiet girl learn courage, wait until you see what happens when she learns to love. Stay with them, because the first night in Boone Ranch is where hearts begin to open. Morning light poured through thin curtains, catching dust motes that danced like soft gold. Irene Vale woke in a bed too large and too clean for her comfort. The sheets smelled faintly of cedar and soap. For a moment she forgot where she was, until she heard boots on the porch and remembered she was a wife now. The thought made her chest tighten. She dressed in the plain blue gown she'd brought from town and tied her hair back, her fingers shaking as she faced her reflection in the small cracked mirror. The woman staring back seemed both foreign and fragile, a stranger wearing a bride's name. Downstairs, Cassian Boone was already working. Through the open window came the rhythm of his day: axe splitting wood, horses snorting, wind moving through the dry grass. He worked without words, without show. When she stepped out, he turned. "You sleep all right?" She nodded. "Yes, thank you." Her voice barely reached him. "Good." He set the axe aside and wiped his brow. "You eat?" "I was waiting, in case you'd join me." Cassian blinked, surprised. "Most folks don't wait on me." "I'm not most folks," she said, and the corner of his mouth lifted the faintest sign of amusement before he followed her inside. They shared breakfast in silence, the only sound the scrape of forks on tin plates. Cassian glanced up once, catching how she watched her food rather than eating it. "You don't have to be afraid here," he said. Irene looked up, startled. "I'm not afraid." He smiled gently. "You're holding your fork like a weapon." Color rose to her cheeks. "Old habits," she whispered. He didn't press further. Instead, he changed the subject, told her about the land, the dry creek that would flood come spring, the old mare that refused to be broken. His words came slow but steady, each one grounding her a little more in this unfamiliar life. After breakfast, Irene offered to help with chores. He hesitated, then nodded toward the corral. "You can feed the hens, if you don't mind feathers." She didn't. In fact, the work steadied her. The hens pecked and fluffed around her boots, their simple chaos somehow comforting. For the first time since leaving the convent, she smiled. Cassian noticed from across the yard. He leaned on the fence, arms crossed, watching her find rhythm in small things. That smile, unforced, fleeting, felt like sunrise after too many gray winters. By dusk, the house smelled of stew. They ate together again, easier this time. Cassian told her she could use his late mother's Bible if she wished. Irene asked him about the stars that seemed closer out here. Their voices met softly, like two rivers unsure how to merge. When the lantern dimmed, Cassian spoke one last thing. "You don't owe me fear, Irene. Not tonight. Not ever." She looked up, breath caught between gratitude and disbelief. "And what do I owe you, Mr. Boone?" He stood, eyes kind but firm. "Just honesty. The rest, we'll learn together." Outside, the crickets began to sing, two hesitant hearts beginning to listen. The third morning at Boone Ranch came with a hush that felt different, lighter somehow. The wind carried the scent of rain that hadn't yet fallen, and for the first time, Irene Vale didn't wake with her heart racing. She sat on the edge of her bed, listening to the distant clang of metal, the steady rhythm of a man working who didn't need to be watched, to be trusted. When she stepped outside, Cassian was repairing the gate near the pasture. He looked up briefly, tipping his hat, and she returned the gesture with a timid wave. That exchange, a simple acknowledgement, felt like a step forward. "Morning," he called. "Morning," she echoed, the word soft but sure. She watched him for a while, the way his shoulders moved with deliberate patience, his hands steady even when the nails bent wrong. There was something comforting in his quiet. Most men she'd known before, men from the church, men from the town, filled silence with noise. Cassian filled it with steadiness. Irene carried a pail to the pump, struggling with the lever until he walked over, wordless, and took hold beside her. Together they drew the water up, their hands brushing once, just enough to make her pulse quicken. "Thank you," she murmured. Cassian nodded. "You're learning the place faster than I expected." "I want to," she said. "It feels wrong to stay idle while someone else works for me." His gaze softened. "You're not here to work for me, Irene. You're here to belong." The word belonged deep. She didn't know what that meant yet. Not in the way he said it, but she wanted to. They spent the afternoon tending the horses. Cassian taught her how to brush their coats without spooking them, how to talk low so the animals could trust her voice. "They can tell when you're scared," he said. "They listen for what you're hiding." Irene ran her fingers down the mare's mane, whispering softly, "Then I hope she doesn't hear too much." He smiled, faint but real. "You'd be surprised what forgiveness animals can give." As dusk settled, they walked back to the house together. The air was cool, the sky brushed with lavender and rose. Irene found herself speaking more freely about the convent garden, the taste of honey bread, how her mother used to hum when she was sewing. Cassian didn't interrupt once. He just listened, head bowed slightly, as if her memories were sacred. By the time the lanterns flickered to life, Something had shifted between them. Not love, not yet, but the quiet ease that love grows from. Before she went to her room, Irene paused in the doorway. Cassian? He turned, one hand still on the lamp. Thank you for not asking too much too soon. He studied her for a long moment. That's how trust breaks when it's rushed. She nodded, her throat tight with emotion she couldn't name. Outside, thunder murmured in the distance. Inside, two hearts began to understand that silence, when shared, could feel like safety. By the fourth morning, the world felt heavier. Clouds had gathered overnight, pressing low across the prairie like a warning. Irene Valle stood at the kitchen window, her hands wrapped around a tin cup of coffee gone cold, watching the wind turn the fields restless. Somewhere out there, Cassian Boone was working to secure the animals before the storm rolled in. She wanted to help, but he'd told her to stay inside. The sky's got teeth today, he'd said. Still, the worry in her chest made sitting idle impossible. She slipped on her boots and stepped out, just as the first drops began to fall. Cassian looked up from the paddock, rain already streaking through his hair. Irene, get back in the house! I can't just watch, she shouted over the wind. Let me help. Before he could protest, she ran to the stable, gathering loose tack and buckets that threatened to blow away. Cassian moved beside her, their shoulders brushing as they worked in rhythm, silent understanding in every movement. Thunder cracked like a rifle shot, close enough to make her flinch. Cassian's hand found hers, firm and grounding. Don't fear it, he said. Storms come and go. You just have to stand through 'em. They ducked into the barn as rain poured in sheets, drumming on the tin roof like 1,000 impatient fists. The air smelled of hay, rain, and something electric. Cassian's hat dripped near her shoulder, his shirt plastered to his frame. Irene wrapped her arms around herself. I've never seen one so fierce. He nodded. They remind you who's in charge out here. Nature doesn't bend for anyone. A long silence followed, broken only by the restless shifting of the horses. Cassian leaned against a post, studying her. You've got more grit than I figured, he said. Most brides would have hidden in the cellar. She met his gaze, unsure if it was teasing or truth. Most brides didn't grow up being told they were too soft to survive. I guess I wanted to see if that was true. His expression softened. It isn't. Lightning split the sky, so bright it lit the whole barn for a heartbeat. Irene gasped, stumbling back. Cassian reached for her, steadying her with a hand to her shoulder. His thumb brushed her collarbone, barely there, but enough to still her trembling. Easy, he said quietly. You're safe. Her heart raced, but not from fear anymore. Something deeper was stirring, an awareness that went beyond gratitude. When the storm finally began to fade, Cassian opened the doors to the fresh, rain-washed air. The ranch glistened like it had been reborn. Irene looked out at the soaked fields, then back at him. You were right, she whispered. Storms come and go. He smiled faintly. Aye, but some change what they touch. As she followed him into the clearing sky, Irene realized that maybe storms weren't meant to be feared, they were meant to be survived together. And that, perhaps, was its own kind of love beginning to take root. The morning after the storm, everything glistened. The ground was soft, the air smelled of wet earth and cedar, and for the first time since she'd arrived, Irene Vale felt something close to calm. She swept rainwater from the porch, humming under her breath a tune from the convent, one she barely remembered. Inside, Cassian Boone was mending a broken saddle strap by the fire. His shirt sleeves were rolled to his elbows, his focus steady, his movements quiet. Irene found herself watching him from the doorway longer than she meant to. When he looked up, she blushed. I didn't mean to stare. He smiled faintly. Don't reckon it bothers me. There was comfort in his gentleness, something patient and rare, like the first warmth after winter. She stepped closer, holding out the towel she'd been using. You missed a spot. Cassian raised an eyebrow but let her dab at the small smear of oil on his arm. The touch lingered longer than necessary. For a moment, neither spoke. "You've got a steady hand," he said. "I used to sew linens," she replied. "Helps to stay still when everything else around you shakes." Cassian's eyes met hers. Thoughtful. "You shake less than most." She wanted to tell him that wasn't true, that she shook all the time, just on the inside, but she only smiled instead. After breakfast, Cassian hitched the wagon to ride into town for supplies. "You're welcome to come," he said. "Could use another pair of eyes." Irene hesitated, then nodded. The road was muddy, their progress slow. The ride itself felt peaceful, the kind of silence that didn't need filling. She stole glances at him when she thought he wasn't looking, but he caught her once and grinned. "You'll wear a hole in my hat if you keep staring." "I was thinking," she said softly. "You don't talk much. Don't have much worth saying." "I don't believe that." He glanced at her, the corner of his mouth twitching. "Then you're the first." "In town," people whispered. She felt their stares, the quiet curiosity that followed a mail-order bride. Cassian noticed, too. When one man muttered something crude under his breath, Cassian's voice cut through the market like a blade. "That's my wife you're talking about." The man backed down, muttering apologies. Irene's pulse raced, not from fear, but from pride. On the way home, she turned to him. "You didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did," he said simply. "You shouldn't have to defend your place here." The rest of the ride passed in silence, the kind that said everything words couldn't. That evening, when Cassian said good night, Irene stopped him with a whisper. "Thank you for speaking when it mattered." He paused in the doorway, his voice low. "You're welcome, Irene. Sometimes silence only protects a man until someone gives him reason to speak again." When he was gone, she touched her lips, realizing what she felt wasn't just gratitude anymore. It was the beginning of something tender, something she was no longer afraid to name. The evening came early that day, a soft gold fading into indigo. The smell of stew filled the kitchen, and Irene Vale moved between stove and table with a quiet rhythm. Since the storm, things between her and Cassian Boone had shifted, subtle but real. Their silences no longer felt heavy. They lingered now, filled with what neither dared to say. Cassian returned from the field just as she was ladling soup into 2 bowls. His boots were caked with mud, his hat tilted low, but his eyes softened when they found her. "Smells like heaven in here," he said, setting his gloves aside. "I didn't think you'd be home before dark," she replied. "I was going to keep it warm for you." "I missed too many warm meals before you came," he said with a small smile. They sat across from each other, the lamplight trembling between them. The only sound was the wind outside and the occasional clink of spoons. Irene felt her pulse race under the stillness. She wanted to say something, anything, but the words tangled. Finally, Cassian spoke. "You ever wonder why I took a wife this way?" Her spoon paused halfway to her lips. "I assumed you were lonely." "I was," he admitted. "But that wasn't all. I'd spent too many years working a ranch that felt like a ghost house. My man used to say a home dies when there's no laughter in it." Irene set her spoon down gently. "And you thought I'd bring that back?" He met her gaze, steady and unflinching. "Didn't know if you could, just hoped." The honesty in his voice settled deep inside her chest. For the first time, she saw not just a rancher, but a man worn by quiet heartbreak, one who still believed in mending what was broken. Irene took a slow breath. "I was afraid to come here," she confessed. "Not because of you, because I didn't think I could be what a wife should be. I don't know much about how to love someone right." Cassian leaned forward, elbows on the table, his voice low. "Love ain't a thing you perform, Irene. It's a thing you learn. Same as tending horses or fixing fences, you give it room to grow." Her eyes glistened. "And what if I fail?" "Then we start again," he said simply. "Gentle, until it feels right." The candle between them flickered, and for a heartbeat, their faces were only inches apart. The air seemed to hum with something wordless, fragile, alive. Irene stood first, her hands trembling slightly as she gathered the bowls. Cassian rose too, stopping her with a quiet, "Irene." She turned. "You don't have to try so hard," he said. "You already make this house feel like home." Her throat tightened. "Then I'll keep trying anyway." As the candle burned lower, she realized that his patience wasn't just kindness, it was a promise. And for the first time, she believed she was capable of being loved, not despite her fears, but through them. The next morning dawned clear and cold, the kind of air that stung the lungs and sharpened the world. Irene Vale was hanging laundry on the line when the sound of hooves cut through the stillness. She shaded her eyes, spotting a lone rider on the road, a figure dressed in a long black coat, hat pulled low, dust swirling around his horse's legs. Her breath caught. Visitors were rare on the Boone Ranch. Cassian had said once that the land was too far from curiosity, and he liked it that way. The rider slowed as he neared the gate. Irene felt a ripple of unease, something about the way he sat his horse, too straight, too sure. Cassian emerged from the barn, wiping his hands on a rag. His expression shifted the moment he saw the man. "Irene," he said evenly, "go on inside." She obeyed, though she paused just behind the screen door, unable to look away. The stranger tipped his hat. "Morning, Boone." "Morning," Cassian replied, his tone polite but guarded. "You lost?" "Don't think so." The man's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Name's Reverend Aldrich. Heard there's a young woman staying here, arrived not long ago. I've come on behalf of her kin." Irene froze. Her kin? That word felt like a ghost dragging chains. Cassian's stance tightened. "You've been misinformed. My wife lives here. She ain't going anywhere." The Reverend tilted his head. "Your wife, you say? I see. Strange. Since the girl's guardian in Shallow Creek sent me to fetch her. Said she disappeared without permission." Cassian's jaw flexed. "You mean Irene? She wasn't a ward, she was a woman making her own choice. This land's hers now, is the same as mine." The man's gaze flicked toward the window where Irene stood half hidden. "Then let her say it." Cassian turned, eyes finding her through the screen. "You don't have to," he said quietly. "You owe no man an explanation but yourself." Irene stepped forward anyway, heart hammering. "I'm not going back," she said, voice trembling but clear. "Whatever claim they think they had, it ended the day I left. I'm Mrs. Boone now." The Reverend's expression faltered, the certainty draining from it. "You don't understand what you're saying, child." "I do," she said. "And I'm not a child." Cassian moved closer, his presence calm but immovable. "You heard her. Time you ride on." A long silence hung between the men, like two storms measuring each other. Finally, the Reverend tipped his hat, eyes cold. "This isn't over." When he rode off, the sound of hooves faded into the hills, leaving only the soft flap of wet linen on the line. Irene turned to Cassian, her hands trembling. "He'll come back." "I know," Cassian said quietly, taking her hands in his rough ones. "But next time, he won't find you alone." At that moment, as the wind moved through the grass, Irene realized that for the first time in her life, someone wasn't protecting her out of duty, but out of love. The night after the Reverend's visit was uneasy. The wind scraped across the plains like restless hands, rattling the shutters and whispering through the cracks. Irene Vale couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw that man's cold stare and heard his voice calling her child. She rose quietly, wrapped in a shawl, and went to the parlor where Cassian Boone sat near the dying fire. He hadn't gone to bed either. His hat lay on the table, his Bible open but unread. "You should be resting," he said softly, without looking up. "So should you," she replied, taking the seat opposite him. The fire cast light over his face, lines carved deep from years of sun and silence, and now, something else. Worry. "Do you think he'll come back?" she asked. Cassian hesitated. Men like that don't quit easily. He thinks he's doing God's work. She looked into the flames. He's not. He's doing control's work. That's what they always called it. Faith. But it wasn't faith. It was fear. Cassian's gaze lifted, quiet and intent. You never told me what you ran from. Irene's breath hitched. She'd avoided that truth since the day she arrived, tucking it away like a scar beneath lace. But the memory pressed against her ribs now, aching to be spoken. I was raised under a man who called himself a shepherd, she said slowly. He preached obedience like it was salvation. Women were meant to serve, never question. When I turned 19, he said it was time to be given to a man twice my age. I refused. So he called me wicked and locked me in the chapel until I repented. Cassian's jaw tensed. How'd you get out? My mother. Her voice trembled. She slipped me the key and said, run while your legs still can. She didn't follow. I never saw her again. The silence that followed was thick and heavy, broken only by the pop of embers. Cassian leaned forward, his voice low. You were right to run. No woman should live under that kind of chain. Irene met his eyes. And yet, I was afraid to marry you. I thought all men were the same. I'm not, he said quietly. I know that now. She reached out, her fingers brushing his across the table. You've never tried to own me. You just let me breathe. Cassian turned his hand, holding hers fully now. You don't owe me thanks. You owe yourself peace. Her throat tightened. And if I can't find it? His voice was gentle. Sure. Then I'll help you look. Outside, the wind softened. The fire burned steady again, painting the walls in warm light. Irene exhaled slowly, feeling a weight lift that had been there for years. Cassian didn't speak again, and he didn't have to. In the space between their joined hands, something sacred took root, not born of fear or duty, but of choice. For the first time, her heart believed it might stay. The next morning broke with a chill that clung to the bones. The sky was still gray when Cassian Boone saddled his horse. He had that look again, the one that meant he expected trouble. Irene Valle stood on the porch, her shawl pulled tight around her shoulders, watching him secure his rifle behind the saddle. He's coming back, isn't he? She asked. Cassian nodded once. Word came from town. The Reverend's stirring up folks, saying you were taken against your will. Sheriffs riding out to make sense of it. Her heart sank. And if they believe him? Then we tell the truth, Cassian said firmly. All of it. You're not hiding anymore. She wanted to believe him, but the fear that had once ruled her life was clawing at the edges again. Still, she lifted her chin. Then I'll stand with you. By mid-morning, a small group of riders appeared on the horizon, dust trailing behind them like smoke. The Reverend led them, hat gleaming black beneath the sun, his smile tight and righteous. 2 lawmen followed, wary, but listening. Cassian stood at the gate, steady as an oak. Irene joined him, her hands clasped, though her knees trembled. Mr. Boone, the sheriff called as they approached, we've come to clear up a claim. Reverend Aldrich here says the lady's a runaway under guardianship. Cassian's tone was calm but sharp. He's mistaken. She's my wife, and she's here by choice. The Reverend scoffed. Choice? That girl doesn't know what that word means. She's been led astray by sin and sentiment. Irene stepped forward before Cassian could reply. No, she said, her voice rising with a strength that surprised even her. You don't get to speak for me anymore. The sheriff turned toward her. Ma'am, is that true? You came here of your own will? Yes, she said, standing straighter. I left because the life he offered wasn't one of faith, it was one of fear. I married Cassian Boone because he gave me something no sermon ever did. Peace. The Reverend's composure cracked. You're confused. You were chosen for higher purpose. Chosen by who? She interrupted. By you? By men who twist God's name to keep women small? Cassian's hand brushed her back, not to guide her, but to remind her she wasn't alone. The sheriff looked between them, then back to Aldrich. Seems to me she's speaking clearly enough. No crime here. The Reverend's face burned crimson. You'll regret this, both of you. Cassian's voice was steel. Not likely. When the riders finally turned away, the air seemed to release a long-held breath. Irene watched until the last speck of dust vanished on the horizon. Cassian turned to her. You spoke like someone who's done with running. She exhaled shakily. I am. I think I've been running my whole life, from fear, from shame, from myself, but not anymore. Cassian smiled faintly. Then maybe now we start living. And as the first sunlight broke through the thinning clouds, Irene realized she wasn't just free, she was finally home. Winter came and went quietly that year, leaving behind soft green shoots that pushed through the thawing ground. Irene Boone, for she had truly become that, now stood on the porch one morning, watching the sunrise spill gold over the land. The air was cool, sweet, with new grass. The ranch was alive again. Cassian's voice carried from the stable, low and calm as he spoke to the horses. She smiled at the sound. Months had passed since the day the Reverend rode away, and with every sunrise since, the weight on her heart had grown lighter. She no longer woke expecting the world to break beneath her. She woke up expecting peace. When Cassian appeared, brushing dust from his coat, he found her barefoot on the porch steps. You'll catch a cold out here, he said gently. Irene laughed. Then I'll let the sun warm me. He climbed the steps and stood beside her, silent for a long moment. The land stretched wide before them, cattle grazing, wind sighing through the grass, the steady pulse of a life rebuilt. You ever think about how far you've come? He asked. She tilted her head, thoughtful. Every day. Sometimes I still don't believe it's mine. The quiet, the freedom. You gave me that. Cassian shook his head. You took it. I just stood still long enough for you to find it. She smiled, soft and knowing. Then maybe we both found something. They spent the afternoon mending fences, laughing over small mistakes, sharing stories of their pasts in ways that no longer hurt. Irene spoke of her mother's lullabies. Cassian spoke of the day his father taught him to ride. Each word wove their lives together a little tighter, like threads finally finding the pattern they were meant for. By dusk, a few neighbors arrived, hands from nearby ranches, folks from town bringing food and music to celebrate the spring. Someone brought a fiddle, another a guitar, and soon the yard filled with laughter. It was the first time Cassian had opened his home to others since his mother's passing. When the music slowed, the crowd turned expectantly toward Irene. Sing for us, a woman said. They say you've got a voice soft as rain. Irene hesitated, her cheeks warming. It's been a long time. Cassian met her eyes. Then, tonight's as good a time as any. So she sang a tender, trembling melody her mother once hummed while sewing by candlelight. Her voice carried across the open land, pure and steady, finding its way into the night. When she finished, the silence that followed was reverent. Then the crowd erupted in applause. Cassian stepped forward, his hand finding hers. You made this house sing again, he said quietly. She smiled, tears glinting. No, Cassian, we did. As the stars gathered above the ranch, Cassian drew her close. The world around them felt vast and safe all at once. Irene rested her head against his shoulder, whispering, This is my first time feeling truly loved. Cassian's reply was soft as the wind through the grass. Then I'll make sure it's never your last. If you thought their love story ended here, wait until you see what the next sunrise brings.